Yesterday, we showed you something spectacular. David Suzuki, the environmental expert, the genius, the celebrity, let's say it, the saint, being grilled by a live TV audience in Australia on their government TV station, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation. He's never been grilled before in Canada because Suzuki never allows himself to be put in a situation that he doesn't control. In Canada, he's carefully pre-screened questions at public events, and he only submits to loving media interviews by his friends, usually his fellow CBC reporters, who would never dare to challenge the great man. Even when he speaks to children, Suzuki carefully stage manages the exercise, pre-screening their questions, pre-scripting the event, and never allowing even a child to have a follow-up question. It's a deliberate strategy. He doesn't want to debate, just to indoctrinate. That's why he targets children, like he does every year when he teams up with the National Film Board, which uses tax dollars to get hundreds of schools around Canada to pipe in his propaganda directly to their classrooms. Here he is at their 2011 propaganda session explaining why he targets children.
We need to educate children, and we need those educated children to influence their parents.
Of course he does. Needless to say, the National Film Board has banned our cameras from attending subsequent events. Now, compare Suzuki's standard operating procedure in Canada, talking to kids, to what happened in Australia when he appeared on a town hall-style talk show for a full hour. I'm frankly startled that he agreed to do it when he didn't pre-script each question like he does at schools. Maybe he thought they'd be too dazzled to ask His Royal Highness any tough questions, but they did. And he crumbled. Here's a short excerpt from my favorite moment that we showed you yesterday when Suzuki revealed he had no clue about global warming or the science behind it. Just a reminder, IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's part of the United Nations that studies global warming, and that's all that Suzuki seems to know. Watch this.
In fact, the warming continues. It may have slowed down, but the warming continues, and everybody is anticipating some kind of revelation in the next IPCC reports that are saying we got it wrong. As far as I understand, we haven't. So where are you getting your information? I'm not a climatologist. I wait for the climatologists to tell us what they're thinking.
Well, you want to respond to that, Bill?
Sure, yeah. UAH RSS had GIS data shows a 17-year flat trend, which suggests there may be something wrong with the CO2 warming theory.
Yeah. What is the reference? I don't...
Well, they're the main data sets that IPCC use.
What was the data sets you're talking about again? What's those things you said? David Suzuki had no idea what that guy was saying. He had no idea what those terms meant. He had no clue. He asked what the reference was. That would be like someone saying they were an expert on outer space, but then saying, what does NASA stand for? What's NASA? Now, most people wouldn't know that GISS stands for the Goddard Institute of Space Studies. That's actually part of NASA that measures global warming. Same with the other acronyms that fella used. Those are all IPCC scientific groups, like universities. But you'd think a self-styled expert on global warming like David Suzuki would know those things. Hell, even I know them. But Suzuki didn't have a clue. The clips we showed you yesterday were so staggering, so shocking at how little Suzuki knew about global warming. It genuinely looked like he hadn't picked up a scientific journal in 20 years. He was just repeating the same bland talking points he's done since the 1990s. It was embarrassing. I think his Australian hosts were genuinely surprised. But look, we've got to move on. There's just too much new stuff in the interview that I still want to show you. After Suzuki's global warming meltdown, he was asked about alternatives to fossil fuels like nuclear power. And his answer to the nuclear power question is just so awesome, so weird, so incoherent. You just got to hear the whole thing. Listen.
What's needed now is to be able to put green energy directly on the grid. You can do that with solar, geothermal, or wind. Nuclear, to crank it up, will take 15 to 20 years to put those plants on stream. They're very, very expensive, as well as being unreliable. Far better to say, look, we've got 1,000 Pearl Harbors going off at once, and we can't even wait for nuclear now. We've got to go full tilt. And anybody that would argue that in Australia, you've got to go nuclear to be clean, I mean, what the hell's going on? You've got something Canadians would kill for. called sunlight. And a huge part of your country that is very, very short on people. It seems to me solar farms could be spread right across here, and I don't get the argument for nuclear.
Oh, there's so much gorgeousness in there. It's weird to call nuclear power unreliable for the first place. I mean, those plants last for 50 years or more, and they work rain or shine, wind or no wind. Compare that, say, to wind turbines that only work when it's windy, but not too windy. Take, for example, Ontario, that has hundreds of wind turbines with 1,700 megawatts of installed power. Well, look right now, this real-time measurement shows that just 82 megawatts are even turning. That's 5 or 6%. 95% of Ontario's wind turbines are not even turning at this moment. And he calls nuclear unreliable? Now, I'm not sure what the Pearl Harbor's comment meant. It's just so awesome to hear there's 1,000 Pearl Harbors going on. What does it mean? But it's also just great to hear him say that Australia has sunlight that Canadians would kill for. I don't understand. I mean, we have sunlight too, I think. I mean, I don't want to talk about stuff like astronomy or anything, but aren't we on the same planet revolving around the same sun? I mean, our wintertime is their summertime, so our seasons are reversed, but I just don't know what the old man's saying. Now, normally it would stop there. People would be puzzling over the Pearl Harbor thing and nuclear and how Canadians really, really want sunshine or whatever, and it would be done. Like the great oracle, we'd all be trying to put meaning into the old fool's cryptic comments. But in Australia, they actually let people have a follow-up question. I don't think that's ever been caught on tape in Canada with David Suzuki. So that is one thing we Canadians truly do wish we had, Australia style. A chance to ask the great man to explain what the hell he's talking about. So here, take a look at how that went down under.
We have lots of sunlight in Australia, but the problem is renewable energy is diffuse. If people can think back to January 2011 or January 2010, we had a whole month when it rained just about every day. The sun didn't shine. There was very little wind for a lot of those days. We do not have the technology at the moment to store energy for weeks at a time, enough to power the great cities like Sydney and Melbourne.
Okay, all right, well, that's a good place to leave that again. David, do you want to respond to that? I mean, it is the argument that to create enough energy to power large cities, it's not going to be enough just to have solar power.
Well, that I don't know. Let's ask our experts. My understanding is there's plenty of sunlight beyond anything all of humanity needs and will need into the future. We just need a major program to harness that and assume there will be creativity in the process that will solve the issues of storage.
So in real life, it doesn't work yet? But Suzuki knows there's all this sun, so much sun. It's so sunny. He loves the sun. All we need now is some experts and some creativity and a major program. You know, I think I've seen that brilliant idea before at a series of deep thinking talks sponsored by the satirical website called The Onion.
My idea, to create a car that runs on compost. So how does it work? Well, it's quite simple. Instead of using gas, it uses compost. Compostization. That's my idea for what we'll call the process of converting compost into fuel. The idea is there. It just needs implementation. Step 1. Devise an idea to create a car that runs on compost. Step 2. Create the car. We've already completed step 1. We're halfway there. I'm an idea man. I link up with implementers, and then we share the money. Once the car is produced, we will sell its designs to a major automaker. That's another idea.
Dear friends, other than the fact that that young guy, that comedian, is 26, not 76, is what he said any less scientific or experty than the crap that Suzuki said when called about the problems of solar power when it's not sunny? No wonder the Australians were just groaning. Look, the conversation turned to energy that actually works in Australia, namely natural gas, clean burning, plentiful, cheap, so much that Australia plans to export enormous amounts of it in the years ahead. No major program needed to figure out how. Here, watch.
The Gippsland region in Victoria boasts highly productive farming land and a tourism industry. Why should our valuable and irreplaceable assets be secondary to mining interests? Particularly when communities have made it abundantly clear that they do not want this fracking industry.
David.
Why are you asking me? I'm not an Australian, for God's sakes. I don't get it. Fracking is one of the dumbest technologies there is. We have no idea what is under the ground. You know, because we're an air-breathing land lubber living on the top skin of the planet, we think out of sight there's nothing down there. We have no idea what we're doing when we pump vast amounts of water down there. We have no idea whether it'll end up contaminating our drinking water. We don't know. But we're just going to go down there and try to frack as much gas as we can get out of the ground. This is just, I think, crazy, especially for a country as water poor as Australia. But why do you ask me what to do? I mean, it seems to me that's a political issue. And if people in your area don't approve of it, why isn't that registering? You've got a democracy.
I suppose people are asking you because you have strong opinions on the subject, and we
Do
should
I have
also,
strong opinions?
We should. It seems that you have, but we should also ask the obvious question: the United States has virtually become energy independent as a result of this kind of technology.
Yes, and there is a massive, massive growing opposition to that, fracking.
There's a lot in there. He says that fracking is one of the dumbest technologies. That's his scientific term. Dumbest technologies there is. What does that even mean? I mean, if you want to talk about it, fracking is actually a brilliant technology. I mean, 2 miles down and then turn a pipe sideways like a bendy straw and make little cracks in the shale down there to release gas or oil that's normally trapped in pockets of shale. It's extremely high tech. Seismic science, precision engineering. I'm not sure what dumb technology even means. Now, it's true the technology in basic form has been around since the 1940s, actually. Over 1 million wells have been fracked in the United States, hundreds of thousands in Canada. It's caused the price of natural gas in the U.S. to fall compared to, say, the price of energy in Ontario that's never been more expensive because of wind turbines that don't work most of the time. But what about the slander that fracking poisons water? Well, let's ask a real scientist, Lisa Jackson, Obama's first EPA chief, who couldn't exactly be called a fossil fuel industry shill. Here's her testimony on this question before Congress.
Is there any evidence that hydraulic fracturing, however, can affect aquifers and water supplies?
There is evidence that it can certainly affect them. I am not aware of any proven case where the fracking process itself affected water, although there are investigations ongoing.
Fracking has been done in the United States for more than 60 years, 1 million times and counting. And the EPA has not found a single case ever. Oh, and believe me, they're hunting. Not a single case of water being contaminated by fracking ever. And that's because fracking happens extremely deep underground, usually 1 mile or 2 underground. So that's a mile of mountain between the fracking and our water table, which is usually just 100 feet down or so. Suzuki is, of course, clueless. I mean, if the man doesn't know his global warming, despite talking about that for 20 years, do you think he knows anything about fracking, which is relatively new on his political fundraising dashboard? But he's also out of sync with Australia itself. I mean, let me tell you what is probably the single largest infrastructure project in the free world right now. It's a $29 billion investment in Australia called the Wheatstone LNG project. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas. $29 billion of private money. Chevron is the lead company, but it's so big they have partners too. They're building one of the world's largest pipeline and export terminals to sell Australia's fracked gas to China to compete against gas from Iran and Qatar and Russia, the countries with the world's largest gas reserves. Stop for a moment though, $29 billion to build a facility. How many jobs is that? Well, at least 6,500 jobs during construction. Of course, all the fracking jobs that will permanently work to supply that, 6,500 jobs plus. 6,500 families. I don't know, that's 20, 25,000 people, plus all the tax money in perpetuity. I mean, I know Suzuki doesn't care about that because he's a millionaire 1%er already. But Australians clearly like it. They're going ahead with it. They just elected a pro-fracking prime minister. I don't think Suzuki even knows about Wheatstone. I don't think he has a clue about Australia. But enough from me. Back to Suzuki.
Our major political parties are committed to increasing our population by giving cash payments such as baby bonuses, paid parental leave, etc. In our overpopulated world, do you think it's selfish and immoral to pay people to have babies?
Selfish on whose part? The taxpayer's part? Who's paying for it? I don't understand. We're beyond the carrying capacity of the planet for our species. But it's not just a matter of numbers. It's a matter of consumption per person. And certainly when you look at the consumptive pattern of our populations, the industrialized world is the most overpopulated part of our species.
Now, we've talked about Thomas Malthus before. Remember him? He wrote a book back in 1798 saying there was no way the world could feed everyone. I mean, there were 1 billion people back then. They probably said the phrase 1,000 million just for impact. Malthus said that England would starve by 1850. Of course, it didn't. It got fat. The world now has 7 billion people. There are some folks who are hungry, it's true, but the biggest countries, China and India, are getting fat also. There are no more famines there. Of course, Suzuki is from one of the world's least sparse countries, Canada. We've got the second largest geography in the world with just 34 million people on it. Australia is also huge with even fewer people, but he says we're overpopulated, which is extra weird because he has 5 kids himself. But of course, he also lectures people about material greed. And he's a multi-millionaire. Suzuki was asked about his zero population growth, for others' point of view, and his zero immigration policy, too. Look.
Now, you got yourself in hot water at home recently when you said Canada is full and that the immigration policy is disgusting.
Yes.
What was your point?
Well, the immigration policy that is disgusting is we are allowing people to come in if they pay us a whack of money or if they are trained in medicine or some of the high professions that are desperately needed by the countries from which they come. We're just buying them. We're not willing to pay to train our own people, and we're sucking them from some of the poorest countries like India and Pakistan and South Africa. We're bringing them into Canada. And I happen to think that's disgusting. I think that we have a responsibility to those populations in other parts of the world that are far poorer than ours, because we are obscenely wealthy compared to them, and we've got to share it with those other...
Can I just ask you the obvious point then? I mean, the idea that Canada is full means you close the doors, you don't let poor people in if they want to come to Canada.
I think that we have an obligation with refugees. I'm proud to say that we took 50,000 Vietnamese boat people when they had the problem. But I think the reality is that we are way over the capacity of Canada to support the population we have.
Now, as I said, when Suzuki first came out with his none is too many immigration policy, it's weird coming from the son of Japanese immigrants who were interned in Canada during the Second World War. It's just weird. It's weird coming from a guy with 3 homes in Canada saying we consume too much. It's weird to hear him tell us to use less, consume less, earn less, have fewer kids. It's weird that he keeps repeating all of this despite being hammered the first time when he first mentioned it in Canada. But that's the thing about Suzuki. He really doesn't freshen up his old material. His global warming knowledge is weak and tired and 20 years out of date. His fracking knowledge is less than 0. He didn't even try to cite facts in his answer there. He does some weird, we don't know what's under the earth. We're on the top and it's mystical down there. I mean, like he watched Lord of the Rings and that's what he thinks is under the earth. And he just keeps pounding away saying, keep out the damn foreigners. It's weird in that one moment he says we're paying the foreigners to come here, and then at another moment he said they're paying us. It's incoherent. But that's how Suzuki's always been. He's not a logician. He's not a scientist. He's an entertainer. A man who has figured out how to make millions. Here's David Suzuki's speaking fee website. We already knew that he charges Canadian schools $30,000 to speak, plus expenses. Well, his foreign fee, as you can see here, is between $75,000 and $150,000 for a speech overseas, as in Australia. Suzuki may be clueless about science, but by God, he's a genius at making money, isn't he?